Elon Musk spoke at Tech Week in Italy. Here's just the basics of it and everything you need to know. I'm Brian. Welcome to my Tesla Weekend.
Elon, what is the source of your inspiration?
The source of my inspiration, I'd say, is somewhat philosophical. The thing we should be aiming for is increasing the scope and scale of human civilization so as to best ask the right questions for the answer, which is reality or the universe. And so if you accept that premise, then we should work to ensure the long-term survival and prosperity of humanity, of consciousness, and we should seek to extend that consciousness beyond Earth to other planets, eventually other star systems. That is the nature of my philosophy.
What comes after Mars?
It's more than just exploration. It's actually extending the scope and scale of consciousness and the length of time that consciousness will exist as we know it is greatly extended by being a multi-planet species. But it is much harder to go and establish a self-sustaining city on Mars than it is to simply explore Mars or go for a visit. I think we need to turn Mars into another planet with life as we know it. It's the only real possible location where that can be done. So only one planet, really, Mars. So if we are able to establish a self-sustaining civilization on Mars, I think this will go a long way towards securing the long-term survival of humanity. And as I said, it would increase the scope and scale of consciousness and would drive the development of new technologies that would ultimately enable us to go further, certainly further in the solar system, but ultimately to go to other star systems and just go out there and find out what's going on. Are there other civilizations that existed perhaps hundreds of millions of years ago or a billion years ago that maybe lasted for a long time? Might have lasted for millions of years. Whereas if you look at human civilization, it's only been around for about 5,000 years if you consider civilization to have begun from when the first writing existed. First writing in any meaningful sense existed about 5, maybe 6,000 years ago. So it's a very short period of time, considering that Earth is 1.5 billion years old and the universe is 13.8 billion years old. So, I think we'd learn a lot about, just kind of like what the heck is going on. We ultimately want to go out there and see the other star systems in our galaxy. I'm not sure we will ever get beyond our galaxy, but we can at least see what's happening in the great many stars that are in our galaxy. Maybe we'll meet some alien life that we can talk to. That would be interesting.
You mostly created new companies. What is your recipe for that?
Well, I think it's quite difficult to create a new company and have it be successful. And generally, I do not recommend creating new companies unless you feel very compelled to do so. Starting a new company and making it successful, a friend of mine has a good saying for that, which is, it's like eating glass and staring into the abyss. So that sounds like something you want to do, then start a company. So it's quite difficult. But the basics of starting a company are, you have to have an idea that is compelling, or you think that could be a product that could be very valuable to the world. And then you've got to find a lot of talented people and convince them to do this new thing, because talented people are already doing something. So you have to convince them to do the new thing. And that can be it's very hard to do that. And then you have to build the company up. And a company goes through a life cycle, like a human or like any animal. It starts off very simple, like one cell, then you get a few more cells, and then you get some organ differentiation, you start growing arms and legs, and they become like a baby, and then a toddler, a child, and teenager, adult. The life cycle of a company is very much like that of a creature. And you have to reinvent the company at every stage. So this is why, some companies get to be a large size and some do not. It's because you actually have to reconfigure the country at the various stages of its life cycle.
2008, when many people wrote off Tesla. How could you reverse the situation then?
Yeah, that was a very difficult time. I think, like John, we've gone through many difficult times. Tesla has come close to bankruptcy, I don't know, maybe half a dozen times over its life. And actually, probably the most serious one was 2008 and 2009, because Tesla was just a very small company making in low volume a sports car that was kind of expensive. It was basically the only electric car being built at the time. So it was very difficult to get customers and very difficult to get investors. And although I had money from PayPal, I had actually run out of the money from PayPal. So I personally had no money left. In fact, I had to borrow money from friends to pay the rent. I didn't even have a house. So it was pretty intense. And like in that case, we actually raised the money to keep the company going on Christmas Eve of 2008. And that was the last hour of the last day that it was possible to raise money. And if that call had not gone well, then we would have gone bankrupt. That was pretty intense. And then the next most intense time was, the 2018, 2019, when we were struggling to get the Model 3 to volume production. And so we were really in a very tough situation, because the thing that's I think a lot of people don't fully appreciate is that while it's actually relatively easy to come up with prototypes and show cars, it is very difficult to achieve volume manufacturing. The notable thing I think about Tesla is not so much that Tesla made electric cars, because others have made electric cars, but rather that Tesla was able to achieve volume manufacturing, I think, as the first US company to achieve volume manufacturing in 100 years, after Chrysler in the 20s. So the difficulty of this cannot be overstated. Production is staggeringly hard, and I have a great deal of respect for companies and people that are able to do volume production and make good products and actually be prosperous. It's very difficult. So it's just one thing after another. Yeah, and I'd say probably the longest extended period of pain that I've had is from 2017 to 2019. Just about 3 years there. Actually, it was great talking to John, actually. John was very supportive. Yeah, but very, very tough. The thing that's one of the things that makes cars especially difficult for manufacturing is that there are on the order of 10,000 unique parts or processes in vehicle production. And if even one of those has a problem, you cannot make the car. So the production moves as fast as the slowest, least lucky, least competent of, let's say, at least 10,000 unique parts and processes, some of which are within your control and some of which are at suppliers. So it's just very hard. I was sleeping in the factory for quite a while there.
But how can we produce enough energy to sustain growth?
Long term, we'll get most of our energy from solar and wind, in addition to geothermal and hydropower. And I would say also people should really think positively of nuclear energy. I'm talking about just traditional nuclear energy that's well engineered. I think these days recently I've been surprised by a movement away from nuclear energy, but I think actually the reality is it is actually quite safe, and we should have more nuclear energy, or at least not shut down the nuclear power plants that we already have. My considered opinion is that they do not present a danger. So there's a strong movement to get rid of nuclear power plants, which I think is not good, especially if they are to be replaced with coal power plants. I think the evidence is very clear that there's much more of a health risk from coal power plants than there is from nuclear. Solar energy is often underestimated, but the Earth would be just a cold, dark ice ball at 3 degrees above absolute zero if it was not for the sun. And the sun also powers almost the entire ecosystem. The sun powers the plants and the plankton, and then from there, the whole ecosystem above plants and plankton. So you can think of really Earth as being already almost entirely solar powered. And but then there's like a little bit of extra power that's needed to power human civilization, which is small compared to the total solar incidence on Earth. The solar energy on Earth is approximately a gigawatt per square kilometer. And if you wanted to, say, power all of Europe with solar, you would only need a fairly small piece of land. In reality, it would be distributed over many pieces of land, so you don't have to have too many long power lines. But basically, like as a rough guide, about 200 kilometers by 200 kilometers of solar would power all of Europe. maybe even a little bit less, but comfortably 200 kilometers by 200 kilometers of solar would power all of Europe. So, this could be a combination of land within Europe or perhaps just across the Mediterranean where there's a lot of sun. But basically, there's so much solar that you could very, very easily, with a very small patch of land, relatively speaking, power all of Europe, all of the world, in fact. This is important to appreciate, that only a very small portion of the world would need to have solar panels to power all of civilization, and then an even smaller piece of land would be required for the batteries required to store that solar energy overnight so that you can have energy at night and during the day.
How can human beings interact with machine, Elon?
The full story of Neuralink is quite complicated. The overarching goal of Neuralink is to mitigate the AI control risk, so that as AI gets smarter and smarter, we need to do something to enhance the bandwidth between ourselves and the machine extension of ourselves. Like, we are already a cyborg to some degree, in that our phones and our laptops and our computer applications are an extension of ourselves. But the bandwidth to the computers, especially to the phone, is very slow, where we essentially are outputting with thumbs, two slow-moving thumbs. This is a very low bandwidth situation. So I think from an existential threat standpoint, Neuralink is aimed at improving human-machine symbiosis with the idea of ensuring that humanity can have a good coexistence with artificial intelligence. Now, in the short term, over the next several years, Neuralink will attempt to solve a number of brain injuries and brain diseases. So our first application, for example, is to enable someone who is a quadriplegic or tetraplegic to be able to control their computer or their phone just by thinking. And we've already demonstrated this actually with a monkey that can play video games and use a mouse cursor and click on things on a computer. And so we're very confident this will work, and hopefully we'll have our first human trials in the next 6 months or so.
Aren't these technologies also going to help us understand better nature? And if you could actually communicate with your dog or with your trees, wouldn't that open up a whole universe? Do you want to share the animal, Elon, that the Neuralink team would be most excited in communicating with?
I think the things that animals want to communicate with, as far as we can tell, tend to be fairly straightforward. Monkeys are the most sophisticated, but I think you could communicate with your dog, I suppose. Although I think I know what my dog would want. He only wants like about 4 different things. It's like food, water, go outside, and be petted. But maybe there's more to it than that. Maybe he has a secret life of dogs that we just don't know that exists. I believe one should be optimistic about the future. I'm generally of the view, philosophically, that it's better to be optimistic and wrong occasionally than pessimistic and right. I think you want to look on the bright side of things. And I'm a little worried that young people today maybe sometimes are a little pessimistic about the future. But I'd like to just assure people that so long as we are not complacent, we'll solve the climate crisis and we will solve these issues. We also need to take them seriously and work hard to solve them. They will be solved, and that people should be optimistic about the future and work to make that optimistic future real. They say that the best way to predict the future is to create it. And so if you take the actions necessary for there to be a good future, then we will have a good future. So I'd encourage people to be optimistic, take the actions that will create a good future, and we will have one. I think you really want to try to learn at every opportunity, and it's great to read books and talk to interesting people and learn as much as possible. I suppose it was Plato or someone who said, or maybe attributed to Socrates, if I know anything, it's that I know nothing. So essentially, just taking that attitude that really we wish to be less foolish over time. But I think it's actually, if you accept the premise that you're a fool, then which we are all a fool to some degree, then I think that, and you wish to be less foolish, then I think that's a good approach, That maximizes your feedback loop and your ability to learn. As soon as you start thinking you know too much, people can't teach you things, that's when you start getting very dumb. I always try to learn new things and being able to talk to interesting people. And you can often learn more by the questions that are asked than the answers that are given. Assuming that I'm still a technologist, then I think there's a lot of opportunity in synthetic RNA. The vaccines that were developed, the ones that were done by BioNTech and Moderna, are really the beginning of what I call digital medicine, or medicine is software. And I think I would say, what's the single biggest opportunity I see right now? It's probably synthetic RNA and the potential for revolutionizing medicine in that way. There's also artificial intelligence. There's one of my favorites which is tunnels. We need a lot of tunnels to address the traffic in major cities. And then there's obviously the continued electrification of transport with aircraft and boats, in addition to cars. There's many other things that will come up as well. I think we live at a very exciting time. If you look at the whole history of the world and humanity, this is a time of the greatest technological growth in history, and it seems to be accelerating.
Elon Musk, it has been reported that you consider yourself not a CEO but an engineer. How do you find these skills in your candidates?
My interview generally consists of just asking people to tell me the story of their career, and in particular to go into depth on some of the toughest problems that they've solved and how they solved them. That gives me pretty good insight into what they can do. I'll generally ask them, detailed questions about some problem that they solved technologically, and that will tell me if they were really responsible or not, because whoever was actually responsible for solving the problem, they remember it very well. It's like seared into their brain. That's, I think, a good sort of filter for, who really deserves credit for a problem and who does not, if they can answer the small detailed questions.
The crisis of semiconductor production is a short-term or a long-term standing?
Short-term, I think. Yes, short-term. There's a lot of chip fabrication plants that are being built, and I think we will have good capacity for providing chips by next year, I think. I certainly hope so, but it appears that way.
Thanks for watching the video, and, thanks to Elon Musk. Hey, thanks to everybody, really. And, if you want to see more great stuff, follow me on Twitter at 4K Podcast. Check out, subscribe. Subscribe, why don't you? I mean, that's still free, still not charging for that. And what did I miss or misunderstand? Let me know in the comments. Blind me with your brilliance, and stay tuned, stay juicy. And I simply cannot wait to hear from you clever robots all upon that flippity flop.